Hey there, I'm David Rodriguez, and this is my second video about Fledge. The first one, if you followed along, then this whole thing should look familiar here. I got a Raspberry Pi set up with a solid state drive. I got Fledge installed on it, and what I'm putting on now is something called a Sense Hat. So a Sense Hat is an extra piece of hardware you can buy along with the Raspberry Pi. There's all sorts of hats out there, so to speak. It stands for hardware attached on top, which is a pretty awesome acronym. And it goes, on top of the Raspberry Pi. And in this case, it has various sensors. And we can get this sensor data into Fledge. And it's really easy because there is a pre-built plugin, a South plugin in Fledge that allows you to bring data in from the Sense app. So that's what we're going to demonstrate. So just as a reminder, the South plugins are what you use to bring data into Fledge, and the North plugins are what we use to get data out of Fledge. And so I want to show data flowing all the way through Fledge. So the North plugin I would like to use and where I would like the data to go is the Pi system. Only problem is I don't have a Pi system, not in a personal capacity at least. So I'm going to try and get my hands on one. If I can't, then I will use Kafka or something like that. We'll throw data into Kafka instead. But yeah, that's the general idea. Let's actually do something with Fledge in this video. Let's get data moving through and learn something along the way. We'll open up the GUI, we'll kind of kick the tires, poke around a little bit together, see what we can learn from what we find. And yeah, hope you enjoy. Just one bit of warning though. If you do actually follow along and you buy a Sense Hat, I don't know if this actually happens with other Sense Hats, but this one, when you turn on the Raspberry Pi, all 64 of these wonderful bright LEDs all go off at once at full brightness. It's like a flashbang. So fair warning, I hope that doesn't happen to you. But yeah, anyway, let's get into it. So we got the Fledge UI up here, and we're reaching it at the IP address that we set up in the last video. So I have it on a static IP address, so I know where to find this every single time. And yeah, there's a lot going on in this user interface that we can check out. But first, let's just bring the data in because it really is that easy just to start bringing in. It's South plugins that bring data into Fledge. So let's go to the South tab here, and let's add a new plugin. And what's really nice is that you can just bring in a new plugin via the UI. Like, we don't have any of these actually installed yet, but we can have it all set up. There's a lot of good stuff going on here. I hope to do some videos on OPC UA, things like that, but let's just start with Sense Hat. So what I believe this is doing on the back end is essentially the same thing as if you were to SSH into the Raspberry Pi and run this command. Just using the app package manager to install the South plugin. So anyway, we got it set up here, and let's give it a name. Let's use a nice arbitrary naming convention. South dot Sense Hat. Good enough. Okay, and the configuration for any South plugin in Fledge is going to be different, and so this is just a particular way it's set up for the Sense Hat. So again, it's just really nice to have a visual way to interact with this. I've worked with a couple different edge type softwares, and they didn't have something like this. So yeah, again, just really nice. Yeah, the general idea is that anything like I'm still learning this myself, but essentially, like if you come from the Pi world, you have tags. That's kind of essentially what assets are here. There's going to be a stream of data associated with the particular asset. So all the assets that we're going to bring in are associated with each of these different sensors. And we're assigning a prefix here. So Sense Hat, that kind of makes sense to give as a prefix. And let's just bring in all these sensors and hit it. And yeah, we want it to be enabled when we do it. And wow, what do you know? It's added, and we should see momentarily there should be readings coming in. I wonder if this will automatically refresh. Oh, there we go. All right, so you can see we have data actively coming in. One quick nice way to look at this is through the Assets and Readings tab. So you can pull this up and just trend out any of the actual trends you want. can start moving the Raspberry Pi around here. Let's see it update. There you go. So mind you, it's coming in here in like 5-second chunks. I believe it is coming faster into Fledge. It's actually just the refresh rate on the UI is 5 seconds, I believe. So yeah, we got that. I noticed one interesting thing when I was testing. You see how the joystick didn't quite show up. I'm gonna go ahead and tap the joystick right now. And so it seems to me that the asset doesn't actually get created until data comes in. So just an interesting thing to note. You see it just kind of popped up there. But yeah, we got data coming in. Okay, so we're back at the dashboard page here, which is the first page that you're greeted with when you go to the Fledge UI. And just one thing to point out here is that you're not just limited to seeing the readings that are coming in, which are now coming in at a nice steady rate, but we also have other things we can put in. Some of the actual asset data itself and other statistics relevant to the Fledge process itself. So I don't fully understand what all these things are yet, but what is nice is that it does at least attempt to describe them to you. It doesn't just give you a name, it actually tries to describe this is what this graph actually means. And that's kind of the common theme that I've found here is there's a certain degree of explainability in all these parameters that the Fledge UI shows you, which I certainly do appreciate. So next, let's just take a closer look at the assets and readings. So if we were to pull up, say, something like humidity, we could change the time range that we look at this, which is very nice. And not only do we have a graph, but we could also look at a summary of it. I'm not sure off the top of my head how much I would really be using something like this. I would think more of doing calculations within Fledge and getting this average, min, max and forwarding it onto something else. But I can imagine someone, say, working on a plant floor, wanting to know if there were any current spikes in their electrical equipment, and this would be one quick and easy way to find that out right by the source. So that's pretty nice too. Another thing, so one of the first things that kind of came across my mind was, what's the retention policy on this? I mean, there's got to be a limit somewhere because we're limited by how much memory we have. How is storage limited on Fledge? And I managed to find that in configuration. It wasn't immediately obvious to me. There's a drop down up here and you go to utilities and there it is. And again, with the whole explainability thing, you have tooltips in pretty much any of these configuration items that tell you a bit more about what they mean. Really, really nice. Yeah, so there it is. By default, I guess it's 72 hours. That works for me. So let's see what else we have. I mean, one of the important things, of course, with any software tool you're using is how do you interact with the logs, or how does it tell you what it's doing and how it's doing. So I think the most relevant to just kind of working with with Fledge would be the system logs, I would assume. I noticed one thing here. There seems to be, so I'm at the info level of severity of the logs, and there seems to be this this stats collector process that spits out a lot of logs, seemingly has like a few messages every 10-15 seconds. And I don't know, in my mind, I would think that would be kind of in the debug category, but just my opinion. But yeah, just nice to see that there's logs readily available in the UI here. Is there anything else worth poking around? I mean, there's a heck of a lot more, of course, to this, but these are just my first impressions as I go. All right, so unfortunately I wasn't able to get my hands on the Pi system. I hope to in the near future because I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that we can dig into there. But in the meantime, let's work with Kafka. And if you're not familiar with it, for one, you don't want to learn it from me. I don't know, it just hasn't been my cup of tea. But two, if you're not familiar, I can at least tell you that it is a messaging service that follows the publisher-subscriber paradigm. So you can publish data to Kafka into what's called topics, and consumers downstream can read from those topics, and Kafka kind of handles all the complications and nuances in the middle of that. Yeah, so I just followed this quick start guide. I'll leave a link to that in the description if you want to follow along. And yeah, I put it on a separate Raspberry Pi. So let's just get it started up here. I'm starting up Zookeeper. Don't ask what that is. I'm not really sure either. And let's get Kafka itself going. So you can kind of tell here, even though Kafka is a really broadly used tool, at least in its raw open source state, it is not the most user-friendly, intuitive kind of tool. Looks like I kind of jumped the gun on starting Kafka there. I needed Zookeeper to load up. So let's do that again. All right, Kafka, we happy? It's really hard to tell. Okay, let's just go with that. In the meantime, let me show you what I needed to do to get remote connections going with Kafka, because if you're anything like me, you might get hung up on this for multiple hours. So let's go into the config folder of Kafka, and let's open up a particular config file called server.properties. This is a pretty important one when setting up Kafka. And the one thing you really need to do is add a line like this. Again, if you are setting up remote connections, if you're doing it just locally to Fledge in this example, you don't really need to do this. But for remote connections, I had to specify my IP address and the port here. All right, so okay, I want to say Fledge is running. Sorry, Kafka, and I just want to show the topics. Oh, we are one folder up or down. Let's go back. And let's just see the list of topics we currently have in Kafka. I believe there's just one, yep, just one internally used topic at the moment. All right, so with Kafka running and happy, I think we can get Fledge going and start getting data out of our South plugin, which I have since disabled. So let me just get that going real quick. Great, we're running. Status should show up here. That's strange. There we go. All right, and oh yeah, if you haven't noticed, it's been a minute since I started this video, huh? I've been a bit busy. You'll see what came out of that in the next video I end up releasing. It should be fun. So, all right, we want to get data going north here. Let's add a new plugin. So you can see right here, I've added a few different north plugins already, including 2 different flavors of Kafka. One is implemented in C++, the top one here. The other one's implemented in Python. Now, I couldn't get the C++ one working. I even set up a local instance of the Kafka to the same Raspberry Pi running Fledge with the same exact configuration as Python. I could not get it to work. I'm not sure what the deal is. I'm just reporting my findings. I'm not really sure why that might have been. But Python worked both locally and remote with the same configuration as C++, and yeah, it was the only one that worked. So let's just go with it. So let's give it a name. I do that every time. All right, and let's just have this run every 10 seconds for instant gratification purposes. All right, so this is where we actually say where Kafka is. So because I have it running on a separate Raspberry Pi, I need to give it that IP address, 192.168.8.222. And with the way these plugins work, it'll basically take everything in Fledge and dump it into one topic in Kafka. As far as I know, maybe there's ways to split it out into different topics. I was not able to figure something like that out. I didn't really spend that much time in that regard. I did check if you could use a filter plugin to potentially split out like the assets into different topics, but I did learn something interesting along the way. At the moment, at least in the making of this video, I had heard that the filters that you can add to plugins currently only work with C++ plugins. They don't work with Python plugins. I'm not sure what the roadmap on that might be in the future, but that's just what I've heard for the time being. All right, so we can choose to do either the date, like the readings itself, the data, or the metadata, the data about the data. Let's just go with the data itself. And we have an option here to actually apply a filter. I haven't tried it myself, but that's nice to have there. So we could actually try and like keep some of the topics, sorry, some of the assets from going into this topic here, which we will call Fledge. All right, and let's start it. So after just a moment, we should start seeing this sent value populate, and that should show we have data moving in. And we can also see, wow, yep, it's filling data that Fledge has been holding on to. So it's throwing a lot of data into Kafka currently. What's cool is now we can see readings sent north actually start jumping up. So this is, again, a really nice way to see what's happening inside Fledge. And let's take a look in Kafka itself. We can set up a consumer. Let me get that. Here we go. We can run a consumer in the console here that will actually read Kafka and spit out the information inside of it of the particular topic called Fledge, which by the way, Fledge has created. I did show initially that the topic did not exist. Now we're going to read from it. In a second. There we go. All right. So yeah, you can see we have data coming in. This is kind of anticlimactic, but this is it. You can do more. I mean, you can pass this downstream and do other stuff with it. You can run streaming analytics with this. But yeah, you can see the actual the asset names that we had and some of the readings that are coming in. Yeah, so this is data fully moving into and out of Fledge. And that'll do it for this video. So I hope you enjoyed that. I know it's a bit rough around the edges. I'm learning along the way. I have to say the hardest thing about making these videos is not the learning of Fledge itself. It's just the takes and the retakes and the editing. So it's a labor of love, but one that I think is worthwhile because if it just makes it easier for others to learn and get into using this tool, I think it's a powerful tool to have in your tool belt, and hopefully one that others can find and make use of as well. So I hope I made things at least somewhat clear as I explained them. If there's anything that's unclear, please let me know. I know at least when I came to the filter plugins, something might have been a little vague when I showed that there is a filter on that Python plugin while mentioning that filter plugins don't work on Python plugins. Very confusing, I know. Let me just try and clarify real quick. The filter plugins, which are a separate plugins that you can configure for Fledge, are currently, as it stands, not compatible with Python written plugins. That particular Python written plugin for Kafka that I showed you, that North plugin, has some feature built into it that acts as a filter of any data moving through. So yeah, hopefully that clears it up. If there's any questions or anybody more experienced than me that can jump in on this, please let me know. Yeah, but anyway, I hope you learned. I hope you enjoyed. See you around.